1. About 10 years ago, I worked as a press operator for a company we'll call WSPG, because those are the actual initials. Screw 'em. Some backstory. When hired on, you're told that there's occasional weekend work that's typically voluntary. Maybe in the 80s, but ever since the mid-90s you're working your 40+ every third weekend at a minimum. The policy stated that without adequate volunteers, you'd have to cover every third weekend, with the other 2 weekends being free. There was also a policy for low OT, start of the year to date overtime hours accrued, and low seniority coverage of weekends when they were really short. Nobody had a designated home machine. We all floated from machine to machine with the intent to keep fresh on everything. But with the reality of sticking the best operators on the most technically difficult operations, regardless of which machine it was on, this resulted in a lot of the time getting a crash course for 4 hours on Friday, so that you could keep things going on Saturday and Sunday with mixed results. As busy seasons picked up, it wasn't unheard of to work 48 to 60 hours on Monday through Friday, for several months at a time, while also working 8 hours a day on 1 out of 3 Sundays and 2 out of 3 Saturdays. Nice checks, but miserable workers, which led to people calling in just to get a day off, which led to more OT, and a vicious cycle started. They'd recently started up a swing shift to get 24/7 coverage on a new press because the cross-training wasn't coming along very well, and they needed a long-term solution to the poor workmanship and shoddy attendance. I volunteered because the incentives seemed amazing at the time, with a constantly changing schedule as vacation coverage and customer demand waxed and waned. The swing shift was a set yearly calendar. Only work your scheduled days. Full stop. No vacation coverage, no extra hours for business needs. You're already scheduled on for half of the year, and taking vacation means you're always working less than half a year. Dream come true. The actual weekly schedule was a weird home brew by a middle manager to minimize weekly OT, and to try not to pay any double time for Sundays. The rule for Sunday was you only made double if you worked the previous 6 days, and had 48 hours in before your shift started. Holidays were a different animal, though, as those were always paid at a double-time rate for hours worked during the holiday, plus 8 hours of holiday pay. Our story occurs around one such holiday. I was scheduled to work on Independence Day in America, and also the Sunday in the same week. So I volunteered for shifts here and there on my days off to load up on OT and guarantee a healthy amount of double time, as I had to hit all 7 days worked. When payday came around, my check looked light, so I looked into it. I was working 7 p.m. the night before July 4th until 7 a.m. the morning of July 4th. What's considered by everybody there to be a July 4th shift, as most of the hours fall on July 4th. Payroll saw it otherwise, though. After much back and forth, I found out that our clocking system just looks at punch-in time to declare the date of the shift. A little experimentation, and I found the cutoff set was a strangely arbitrary time of 8:30 p.m. If you punch in before 8:30 p.m., it's considered a shift during that day. Anything after is considered a shift for the next day. Cue malicious compliance. I was also scheduled for another holiday later the same year, New Year's Eve. I was supposed to work 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., December 30th to 31st. I called ahead and said I was having some issues at home, and I'd be a little late for my December 30th shift, but it shouldn't be more than an hour or two. I rolled in at 9 p.m., punched in, and got right to work. Missing less than 4 hours of your shift was also only half of an occurrence. I punched out at 7 a.m. like normal, got some sleep, and came back in at 7 p.m. for my holiday shift. Except the payroll system tracked both shifts to the same day. So rather than working 24 hours across 2 days and getting paid for 36 hours, I worked 22 hours and got paid for 44 hours. My coworkers were a little miffed at how I gamed the system, as I worked less than them but got paid for an additional 8 hours. But payroll was done at the corporate level, and in my eyes I was just paying myself back for the hours they screwed me out of earlier in the year. I'd like to say it ended there, but there were several other times throughout the next 6 months where I was accidentally late, and ended up making more because of it. That place was a nest of vipers, though. No regrets for trying to get what I could out of them. 2. This happened when I worked at a convenience store many, many moons ago. The original owner, the woman who hired me, basically let the shift managers run the shift. If there were out-of-date products, the shift managers were allowed to throw it away without specific permission from the GM or the owner. The GM and owner trusted the shift manager's judgment. About 6 years into my employment there, the original owner sold the business. The new owners kept on all the staff, but we were basically told that the owners were in charge and the employees were to do nothing without permission. Even the shift managers were not allowed to throw away anything without the owner's permission. The new owners were notorious for recycling old, outdated food. It was disgusting. If there were outdated sandwiches, they made the employees take the deli meat off the stale, soggy roll, put it on a fresh roll with fresh lettuce and tomato, and put it back out for sale. The same with outdated canned foods and such. They would make employees cook the outdated canned food for the hot food bar. It didn't take too long for them to decide that I was throwing away too many products, because basically I refused to recycle the sandwiches. I was told that I was not to throw anything away without consulting one of the owners first. Enter malicious compliance. I got a box and put everything in it that I was going to throw away for the entire shift. If I swept the floor, I dumped the floor sweepings into the box. Customers didn't want the receipts? In the box. Bank wrappers from the $1 bills? In the box. Remnants from my dinner? In the box. Every last paper towel I used to wipe down the counters if I was chewing a piece of gum? Yeah, you guessed it. Everything went in the box. I marked the box, "Do not throw this stuff away before the owner looks at it." After the first night of doing that, I was told not to do it again. I kept right on doing it. After about a week, the owner threw away my box, gave me a specific list of things I wasn't allowed to throw away, and told me to stop being a smartass if I intended to keep my job. I didn't work for them long. They were selling illegal products that could have resulted in the staff getting arrested. Before I quit, I did tell the owner that she needed to stop being an ass toward everyone. I might have phrased it less delicately, and that she and her husband needed to quit being shady. 3. I worked for a small company, less than 12 people, headquartered in a northeastern U.S. city about 4 hours from my home. I was employed for over a year, and we definitely had our struggles, as we were a small startup that had a lot of politics. I became sick with cancer that fall, and my surgery and treatment ended on December 31st, as I was determined not to go into the new year with this burden. I was given 10 days into the new year to return to work, as I would be fully recovered. I had to provide a doctor's note to both my employer and insurance company, I was on temp disability, that I was fit to return to work. I work remotely from home, and I was the only employee to do so. It was treated as a bonus by my management team. This becomes important, as I was required to be in the HQ every Thursday for an 8 a.m. team meeting, but I was not allowed to book a hotel. They fought my travel expenses every month down to the mile. Once my expenses were rejected, as I added 5 miles to their web map, as I needed to justify my need to get gas and my departure from the highway. I mistakenly submitted actual mileage. They trained me well. I started each Thursday at 3 a.m. driving to make the team meeting, and was required to work the full day, which meant a departure after 6 p.m. So one workday each week was 3 a.m. to 11 p.m., depending on traffic. It was not fun, but there was going to be a significant upside that would have made it worthwhile. I was laid off while at the doctor's office getting my note. I was surprised to check my BlackBerry, yes, it was a long time ago, with an email that read simply, As the group has failed to live up to expectations we had, we've decided to close your team and group. You have 48 hours to return all company property. I should add that no one from management ever actually checked in or asked how I was doing either during my treatment or after. I was pretty angered by this email as we grew the company's revenue by over 31% year over year. The email made me actually read my guidelines for employment, and I found out that I had to only make the equipment available to them. And I replied simply stating that they were welcome to come pick up the PC, monitor, etc., but I required 48 hours notice, and I would require them to arrive and depart during business hours. I was told I was being petty. I had months of expenses awaiting reimbursement, which equated to thousands, that I had little faith they would actually pay to me, as they were submitted before my treatment. They informed me that if I mailed back all supplies, they would pay it along with my outstanding expenses. I didn't trust them, and told them that if they made arrangements at one of 3 possible locations, their choice, I would drop off the equipment, but they would pay all shipping and packaging costs directly to the service provider. I delivered every packing box, notebook, business card, monitor, and laptop, anything I had ever touched of theirs, with the explicit instructions that, as I had been threatened several times with failure to comply warnings in their follow-on emails about the condition of each item, I photographed every item. Apparently, they were not very nice to the packing store either, as they made an impression in just arranging the service. The store employees shared this with me while I unloaded the car. I watched them bubble wrap empty boxes and carefully place those boxes inside larger boxes. Lesson learned. It pays to read the terms of employment and to be a genuinely nice person. 4. A few years ago, I worked at a big retail company and had for many years. Eventually, I went through enough grad school education to get my license to work at a higher level. Much more pay, more job satisfaction, more responsibilities, fancy title. But the job market was rough. I stayed on with my company to work in a floater position where I would cover a large area and work at all the stores within that area on a rotating but irregular basis. Eventually, I wanted to get a staff position where I have a single store assigned. The area was huge, the furthest store being over 100 miles from my home, and that is exactly where I was assigned to train for the new role. It was a rough area, folks in my position were robbed and assaulted at gunpoint, neighborhood was very unfriendly, volume at the store was among the highest in the state. Staff turnover was, as you might expect, extreme. Well, after training, I wasn't really being scheduled to float to other stores, once a month at most. I asked to be scheduled a little more diversely, since most of the stores in my area were much closer to my home and didn't require 4 hours of driving a day. Bossman told me that I was the only floater experienced enough to handle that store. I didn't buy it. But what can you do, right? Well, a colleague told me about the mileage reimbursement policy. Floaters working at a store more than 50 miles from home can file for reimbursement of mileage. Over that 50 miles each way can even include meals. So I filed a few of these out and sent them to my boss to sign. He didn't quite refuse, but he never actually signed and filed them. I suspected as soon as I left his office at our district center he tossed them out. Bossman tells me later that they must be lost in the system. Eventually, the same colleague showed me how to fax those same forms to accounts payable, bypassing the district bossman, so I started doing just that. One day, bossman calls me in a panic. He wants me to stop filing the forms. I ask to be floated a little closer to home, but he won't budge. He needs me at that miserable store. He promises me he'll make me a staff role at that store if I promise to stop faxing those forms. Staff roles are a promotion and usually come with better pay, and a few other little conveniences, so I agree. Bossman says there won't be a pay bump right away, but that it'll come down the road. That never happened. 2 years later, the situation at the store has become too toxic even for me. I asked to step down from the staff position to be a floater again, and be allowed to float to other stores. Bossman says that I'm already a floater, never was in a staff position, and that he can't let me work at other stores because it's better for me and the customers if I stay there for familiarity. Floaters do not get scheduled to stores exclusively, so I'm being singled out because they are still desperate to cover that dump of a store. I'm livid, so I start looking. It took me months, but I eventually found an opportunity to make my dream career transition. I put in my formal notice, and that's when the fun started. Remember that whole mileage reimbursement policy? Well, I kept meticulous track of all my shifts, and there is no statute of limitations baked into the policy. So I started filing out those reimbursement forms to retroactively cover every single shift for the past 2 odd years. I skipped the meal part since I didn't want to go through all that effort of finding receipts. I had a friendly store manager sign off on them, and I started sending them to accounts payable directly again. I didn't fax them all in at once, but for each shift in my 2 final weeks I faxed a few dozen in. We still have fax machines in that line of work, believe it or not. I figured, what do I have to lose? Worst case scenario, accounts payable declines the forms. On my last few shifts, I started getting the checks from accounts payable, not added to my paycheck but sent to me directly. Mileage reimbursements are non-taxable income, and this was all tax-free money coming to me. It must have taken a while for the charges to show up on a balance sheet, because a few weeks after my final paycheck, I got a call from my now former boss man. He wasn't happy. He got some big loss prevention manager involved, and together they started saying I was breaking some rule by requesting the payments. They specifically claimed I was ineligible because I agreed I wouldn't be eligible in a staff position. They then threatened legal action against me if I didn't remit the full amounts back that same week. But I had the email chain from when Bossman said I was never staff, and always a floater. I politely referenced that email chain before letting them know firmly that because I was lied to, our prior agreement didn't apply, and I was fully eligible all along. Corporate policy, as confirmed by HR, agreed with me, so I let them know I wasn't returning a single penny. In the end, the reimbursement amounted to well over 21,000 USD, and I transitioned into my dream job. I could say that I would trade that money back for the time I lost commuting to that miserable store 4 hours every shift. But all that pressure motivated me to making the best career move of my life. The great satisfaction of not only professionally surpassing my old boss, but getting to tell him that his lies cost him way more on the way out is almost priceless. I also shared this story and method with many colleagues who were being told wrongly by the bossman that they didn't qualify for this policy. As many may have guessed, I was working as a community pharmacist. I do want to clarify that most of my coworkers, technicians, pharmacists, front-end staff, and customers and patients were amazing people. Between them and the subscription to Audible with a long list of books I always wanted to read, it made the situation such that I could tolerate the commute for all that time. The job market for retail pharmacy was and is also very rough, and I can't overstate that enough. It has empowered big chains to abuse staff in this and other ways, and that also endangers patient care, not to mention staff mental health. I spent more than 10 months searching before I found an opportunity that involved me leaving the profession entirely. The district manager, boss man, and the general store manager, who was fully complicit in the lie, are both still working for the company, last I saw. The moral of this story: please understand your company policies and ignore any verbal agreements or HR-supported decrees otherwise. And be kind to your pharmacy staff. The job and companies are not always kind to them. 5. Not something I did, but something I saw firsthand over 2 days. Years ago, I worked as a registered nurse on a high-dependency ward. Whereas on a normal surgical ward for a morning shift, you would get 6 to 8 patients, on our ward we got a maximum of 3. Think involved patients with multiple conditions. It was not unusual, as an example, to have a physiotherapist, 2 nurses, and a wards person or 2 to help walk a patient using a rollator to the bathroom in the morning for their shower, not because they were heavy, just because of all the pumps and drains that had to come along for the ride, and for their safety. We had a pretty high turnover of staff, about 50% per annum, with the average time someone stayed with us being 12 months. Some left after a year because they could get easier and better paying jobs elsewhere. Some left because of the workload. I left after 3 years because I moved 200 km away. But 2 people were constant on our ward. One was one of our wards persons, not the object of the story, and the other was our ward clerk, Sue. I'll use her real name, as I'm pretty sure that was her name. It's been more than 2 decades. And it's a fairly common name. Sue had been there for years, and she was really, really good at her job. She knew how the place ticked. One morning shift, Sue got absolutely upbraided by one of the new RNs on our ward. I can't remember her name. It doesn't matter. So let's call her RN Myopia. Whatever it was about, it wasn't actually important, and I was there. I was well past my 12 months there, so I was an oldie. The organizational culture on that ward was that we were a team. Remember the story above about taking a patient to the shower, often needing 4 or more people to help. It was not unusual to come back after one of those shower trips to find that your other patients or other nurses had done your dressings for you, made a bed or 2, showered one of your other patients, gave out meds, whatever. You didn't have to ask, it just happened. You did the same for the next person when they were tied up. That's just how the place was. Best ward ever. The team approach extended to the wardies and the admin team. They did their work so you could concentrate on yours. You looked after them, and they looked after you. And correct me if I'm wrong, but the admin office on a ward can wield power. You may not think it, but they can. Anyway, Sue got roasted over something that didn't matter, and RN Myopia finished off with words along the effect of, "You just concentrate on doing your admin job, and I'll do my job as a nurse." Mistake. Such a big mistake. Those of us who had been there for a while on that day took a mental note. Sue would not let this one slide. Next day, we had almost the same team on deck. Normal weekday morning, busy ward, in the middle of showers, dressings, meds, mobilizing, attending to activities of daily living, obs and making beds, tests, ward rounds, and everything else. A theater orderly shows up for one of RN Myopia's patients to take them to theater. But they aren't ready. The one person who could answer the phone didn't pass the message that theater was coming down for the patient for surgery. We watched with amusement, side eyes, as RN Myopia dropped everything to try and prep the patient while the orderly waited. Quick shower with chlorhexidine soap, run through the pre-op checklist, the whole shebang. We made sure her other patients were looked after, but there wasn't any way we were going to get involved between her and Sue. Just as some 15 minutes or so of work had finished in 5 minutes, Sue comes around the corner before the warder heads off with the patient and squares off with RN Myopia, beautifully timed, and says, "Oh, RN Myopia, theater have called for your patient. I was going to come let you know earlier, but I got caught up with my admin work. I see they're here, so I'll leave it to you." Didn't wait for an answer or reply, just spins on her heels and goes back to her desk and phone around the corner. It was beautiful. RN Myopia didn't last much longer, but Sue did until that ward was closed a few years later. I still miss that ward and the people after 24 years. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to Revenge is Ice Cream, episode 131. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. If you enjoyed the video, then please do like and comment and all that good stuff. It's very helpful, and thank you if you have already. Let's see now. I don't think we have any other... Okay, we don't have any story shout-outs, I don't think. But we do have a birthday shout-out to do today. And today's birthday shout-out goes to Max. Hello, Max. And this is... Let's see, is there any more information? Nope, just Max. Okay, and this comes from your partner, Alex. I wish you a very happy birthday, and I hope you're doing lots of wonderful things today on the 11th. It's the 11th, so you have to celebrate right through to next Sunday, but then no celebration after that. Right, let's see. I think that's everything. Okay, yeah. Right, you get the day to yourself. There's no other birthday shout-outs today. Now, before we go, we're going to have a little bit of a sing-song, then we're going to wrap the video up, and I'm probably going to go clean in the kitchen, because it's very exciting, the life of a YouTuber. Okay, here we go. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Max. Happy birthday to you. Okay. And with that, we're going to wrap things up for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.